this saying or not, but if you agree with it. I guess it all depends on what you have two of. Certainly, having two hands is better than only having one hand. Having two shoes would be better than only having one shoe when you're walking outside in all this snow. But what if you had twice the amount of bills to pay? What if you had double the amount of homework? What if there was twice the amount of snow outside and twice the amount of flooding going on? Yes, sometimes two is better than one, but other times it seems like none would be the better option. In our lesson for today, from 1 Samuel chapter 26, we see an example where two is better than one. King Saul is relentlessly hunting down the new king, King David. This wasn't the first run-in that David and Saul have had, nor was it even the second. But for the second time, we see that David shows mercy to Saul. Certainly, when it comes to life sparing, two would be better than one. Sometimes, when you're loving your neighbor, or better, loving your enemy, you have to go the extra mile. Sometimes you have to be twice as nice. That means turning your cheek more than once and trusting in God more than twice. In our lesson, we enter in the middle of an exciting story. To fully grasp everything that's going on, we have to go back a few more chapters to earlier in 1 Samuel. We see that Saul was elected king of the Israelites, and God had given him specific orders of what to do. He was to completely wipe out the Amalekites and destroy everything they had. But Saul doesn't follow through with the Lord's commands. He starts out on his conquest, but he doesn't complete his instructions. Instead of completely wiping out everything that belonged to them, Saul spares their king and keeps some of their best cattle and sheep for himself. So the question you're wondering is, why is Saul hunting David? Why is this whole situation going on? Well, since Saul didn't follow what the Lord had to say, Samuel was going to elect a new king, and that new king was going to be David. So Saul had this jealousy and revenge building in his heart, and so he sought to kill David. He tried to set David up by having the Philistines ambush him and kill him. But the Lord delivered him, and David prevailed. The Lord was with David, and he protected him through all of these bad things. That just made Saul want to kill David all the more. Thus his vengeance for him began to grow and grow, and this relentless manhunt wasn't going to stop. At one point, when David was playing the lyre to soothe Saul, he hurled a javelin at him and tried to pin him to the wall. Saul's murder attempt failed, but his lust for revenge and for killing David had not stopped. Saul continues to try and pursue David. A few chapters before our text, in just 1 Samuel 24, we see that David had been unfairly exiled, and that Saul had these men, and they are chasing him all over the place. They finally have him on this mountain trap there, and they chase him up it. Saul goes there, and he's in a cave all by himself. David sneaks up behind him, and he just cuts off a corner of his robe. David had the opportunity to kill him right then and there if he wanted. He could have ended it for good, but instead he chose to show mercy for the first time. Now in our verses for today, in chapter 26, we see David shows mercy for the second time. Even though David was unfairly treated, unfairly abused, and unfairly exiled, he shows this mercy to his enemy. You can imagine the many thoughts that were going through David's head. It's like, once I already spared this man's life, and I thought we were through with all this animosity. But he's still trying to kill me. Do I let Abishai try and kill this man right here and now? Do I kill one of his other men instead and try to send a message saying that I could have killed him, but I didn't? Or do I simply turn the other cheek and spare his life yet again? When we come to our verses, we see that David and Abishai, they sneak down to Saul's camp. They're there sleeping. They're on hot pursuit of King David, and they're almost right with him. They're sleeping for the night. They're in a deep sleep. David and Abishai sneak down there. They find Saul lying in the middle of a camp, and there's right by his head. Abishai is ready to take him out and to slay him, to end all this madness right then and there. He would do it with just one thrust, just right to the heart. But David tells him to stop. David says, don't destroy him, for who can lift a hand against the Lord's anointed and be blameless? David knew what God's will was. He knew the difference between right and wrong here, and he chose to go down the right path. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have acted like David and spared this man's life again, even though he was relentlessly pursuing to kill you? Or would you have given in and killed this man to end this madness, to end this manhunt? Or perhaps the better question isn't what would you have done, but rather, who are you in the situation? Are you David? Or are you Saul? I'd like to think that I'm David in this situation. I'd like to think that I'm in the right and that all of my actions have been justifiable before the Lord. But when we take a closer look, reality would say otherwise. When we turn to our gospel for today, we see some important words from Jesus that are hard for us to swallow. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also." It's natural for us to want to seek revenge. If so-and-so does something to me, it's only fair that I should be able to do that same something to them. That's how we want to act. That's how our sinful nature tells us to act. But that's not the attitude of a Christian. Not the attitude of someone who has been changed by the work of the Holy Spirit. A Christian will act how David acted. A Christian will take Jesus' words and accept the insults that are thrown to them because he says to. They'll roll with the punches, so to speak. This doesn't say that we throw all self-defense out the window, but at the same time, there's no place for vengeance in the heart of a Christian. A Christian will do as David did. A Christian will turn his cheek even though he knows he's done nothing wrong. And a Christian will show love to his enemy in word, in deed, and in his attitude. David showed love to his enemy. David didn't give into the sinful urge for ending Saul's life right then and there. He didn't give into this feeling of vengeance. Instead, he showed mercy. He turned his cheek. And most importantly, he retained his trust in God. David showed from his past that he had placed his trust in God many times before. And this time was no different. David stopped Abishai from slaying Saul because he knew that he could trust in God to take care of the situation in his own terms. Verses 10 and 11 read, David added, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will certainly strike him down. Either his day will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. However, because of the Lord, I will never lift my hand against the anointed. Instead, take the spear and water jug by his head, and let's go." The Lord would work this situation out on his own timetable, and David knew it. So instead of slaying Saul right then and there, David takes his spear and his water jug as an alternative. Then he gets some distance between them and shouts out to them, basically saying, "Look, I was just in your camp. I could have murdered your king, but I didn't. I spared his life yet again. I've done nothing wrong. I wipe my hands clean of this. There's no evil in my heart for you." So David showed that he trusted in God. He put it in God's control. Instead of taking advantage of the situation that was there in front of him, he instead turned it over to the Lord's care. As you can see, David, he was really a man after God's own heart. It's as if he knew exactly what Jesus would have said and done in this very situation. Well, what Jesus says in our gospel is this: "Have you heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy'? But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Actually, Jesus did more than just say these words. He lived these words. At the end of Jesus' ministry, he, like David, was being hunted for his life. The religious leaders of the day had it with him. They had their plans all set. He was going to get arrested. They were going to have him undergo the sham trial where they'd riot the crowd to rule in their favor. And then they were going to have him beaten bloodied and bruised, and hung on a tree to die. But Jesus didn't deserve any of that. He had done nothing of the sort to obtain such deadly consequences. But even through this all, Jesus loved his enemy. Even though he was wrongfully accused and sentenced to death, he loved his enemies. He even prayed for his enemies. Jesus prayed in the words from Luke, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Wow. Can you imagine that type of reaction if you were right there looking at it? Our God is such a loving God that he shows love for his enemies. He prays for them. It's amazing to consider because by nature, we were enemies of God. We were dead in our sins and our transgressions, and we couldn't do anything about it. But God loved us, even though we didn't deserve his love. He showed love to us, and he changed our status of being enemies and changed it into one of being his dear children. He cleansed us from our sin. He died in our place so that we could wipe out that enemy status. If God loved us so much that he died for us, even though we didn't do anything to deserve it, I think it would be wise for us to trust in him when our enemies are drawing near as well. That's what David did. David trusted in God and showed love to his enemies. David did it even more than once. David had done this before when he had fought Goliath. He put his trust in the Lord that he could take on this massive Philistine. David trusted in God the first time when Saul was hunting him down trying to kill him. And he showed mercy to his enemy. And this time is no different. David showed love to his enemy yet again. We can also show that same love to our enemies as well. But when people are attacking our faith and it starts to interfere with our work and our life, it's not always an easy thing to show love to your enemy. But sometimes showing love to your enemy can make a big difference. Being the Christian that we're supposed to be and showing this love can change a lot. One modern day example of someone living out Jesus' command to love your enemies was written about just a few days ago. Dan Cathy, Chick-fil-A's chief operating officer, took this command seriously. Chick-fil-A, as most of you know, was recently the center of much political debate.